Ruth only went to that school because she got an invitation by mistake. But the moment she stepped through the gate, a tiny voice called out, "Grandma, you came!" Confused, she turned around and saw a little boy with shining eyes. The teacher tried to explain the misunderstanding, but Ruth felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, as if that little boy was already a part of her life. Ruth woke up at the same time every day, even with nothing on her schedule. At 62, routine had become her most loyal companion. She'd make coffee, water the plants on the porch, and sit in the armchair by the window with the same book in her hands, which she rarely opened. The truth was, she wasn't interested in made-up stories anymore. Ever since losing her only daughter 5 years earlier, her own story seemed to have lost its light. The house was silent, meticulously tidy. Photos of her daughter decorated the shelves. Her belongings, a scarf left hanging on a hook, a mug with handwritten quotes, a recipe book filled with scribbles in the margins, remained untouched, like witnesses of a time that would never return. That morning, when Ruth opened the mailbox, she found something unusual. A colorful envelope decorated with hand-drawn balloons. It was a birthday invitation, addressed to someone else, but with her house number. Probably a mistake. She opened it out of curiosity. The party was going to be at a nearby school the next day. Ruth smiled to herself, shaking her head. Must be for one of the new neighbors, she thought. But that night, as she lay in bed, something told her it might be worth going. She couldn't explain why. She just felt it. The next day, she put on a light sweater, clipped her hair back with an old barrette, and walked to the school. As she arrived, she saw balloons tied to the gate, children running around and smiling teachers. The atmosphere was lively, noisy, full of energy, the kind of place she usually avoided. As soon as she stepped through the gate, a child's voice called out from a distance, "Grandma, you came!" Before she could react, a little boy with light brown eyes ran up to her and hugged her tightly. "I knew it. My mommy in heaven told me you'd come." Ruth froze. The teacher quickly approached, a bit embarrassed. "I'm so sorry, that's Noah. His mom passed away 2 years ago. Ever since then, he's held on to this idea that he'll get visitors from heaven on special days. The invitation must have been delivered to you by mistake." Ruth looked at the boy. He was smiling, cheeks rosy, hair tousled. There was something in his eyes, and something that made her forget for a moment the reasons she'd withdrawn from so many places before. "What about his father?" she whispered to the teacher. "He's in the hospital, recent accident. He's being taken care of, but there's no release date yet." Ruth took a deep breath. She could have apologized, said it was all a mistake, and walked away, but something made her stay. "Can I stay a little? Just to keep him company." "Of course," the teacher replied, relieved. Noah took her hand and led her to the cake table, showed her the sweets, introduced her to his classmates, and invited her to sit down. For the entire party, he never let go of her hand. Ruth chuckled softly, a faint smile on her lips. She felt out of place there, and yet strangely at home. When it was time to leave, Noah held tightly onto her arm. "You're coming back, right? Mommy in heaven doesn't make mistakes." Ruth didn't answer. She just ran her hand through his hair and said, "Take good care of your heart, little one." That evening, back home, she sat by the window again. Same armchair, same book, same silence. But inside her, something had changed. Ruth came home at the end of the party, carrying a strange kind of emptiness in her chest. A kind of silence that, instead of calming her, made noise on the inside. On the way back, she looked at the houses around her, bicycles leaning on fences, curtains with cartoon prints, laughter coming from the yards. All of it felt like something that had drifted far from her world long ago. She sat on the porch, holding a mug of lukewarm tea in her hands. And even there, in the place where she used to find some comfort, she found herself staring at the gate, as if hoping someone might call out to her again. The next morning, she hesitated before leaving the house. She walked toward the school with the intention of just passing by, but as she neared the gate, she heard her own voice saying, "Good morning. I came to drop off a snack. For Noah." The coordinator smiled, surprised and grateful. Ruth handed over a small lunchbox with a note clipped to it. "For my new friend." She left without going inside. But later that same day, when she opened her mailbox, she found a drawing. It showed Noah holding hands with her in front of a house with flowers. At the top of the paper, in shaky letters, it read, "Mommy in heaven got it right." The following week, Ruth returned to the school. Noah was waiting for her, his eyes lit up and his smile so genuine that something inside her seemed to tremble. "I thought you weren't coming back," he said quietly. "I thought so too," she replied, smiling gently. From that day on, her visits became routine. Ruth brought little cakes wrapped in floral napkins, told stories, helped with homework. Noah showed her his drawings, talked about dreams he had, and the ones he had stopped having. One of them was simple. "I wish I had a place to call my home, even if it was just on weekends." That phrase echoed in Ruth's mind for days. In the third week, Ruth was invited to attend a school performance. Noah pulled her toward the section for grandmas who volunteered. She hesitated, shyly, but accepted. She sat among women who talked about grandkids, great-grandkids, family vacations, and for the first time in years she felt like she belonged to something again. Later that afternoon they sat together on a bench in the courtyard. Noah played with a dry leaf, while Ruth watched the sky turn orange. "Do you think we can have more than one family in life?" Ruth thought for a moment before answering. "I think life gives us new chances when we least expect it." Noah nodded. Then he said with a tender lightness, "Then can you be my Saturday grandma?" Ruth took a deep breath. She looked at that 6-year-old boy whose eyes carried a kind of longing she knew too well, and she replied, with a warmth she didn't know she still had, "If you want me to, I can." That night, Ruth returned home with the feeling that somehow she had stepped outside of herself, as if, without realizing it, she had opened a small crack, and life gently had started to come in again. Ruth's visits to the school became part of her new routine, though she herself hesitated to call them that. Deep down, she still wondered whether she was simply filling a void or truly building something new. But every time she saw Noah running toward her with open arms and that easy smile on his face, her doubts grew quieter. It was as if that boy, with his quiet joy and hopeful eyes, knew exactly where Ruth's pain lived, and somehow, silently, how to soothe it. On the afternoons when she picked him up for short walks in the school garden, Noah would show her his drawings, talk about his classmates, and spin half-made-up stories about what it would be like to have two homes, one with his dad and another with her. "Does your house have big windows?" Auntie asked one day. "It does. One faces a lemon tree. Mommy used to say that houses with trees in front of the windows belong to people with good hearts." Ruth smiled, trying to hold back the slow-growing emotion. "And what else is in your house?" And he pressed. She paused for a moment. "There are books, an armchair that creaks when you sit on it, and a blue mug that used to belong to my daughter." "You had a daughter?" Ruth nodded, her eyes glowing softly. "I did. A beautiful young woman. She's gone now. But she left a lot of herself with me." Noah didn't ask anything else. He simply took Ruth's hand and held it tightly as if to say, "I understand." In the weeks that followed, Ruth began to notice that her Sundays were no longer so quiet. She started baking little cakes again, reorganizing the kitchen, even opening the windows earlier in the day. One day, passing by a mirror, she realized she was wearing earrings, something she hadn't done in years. At school, Noah already called her Grandma Ruth in front of the other kids. "She's not my real grandma," he explained, "but she's the one heaven sent." Ruth laughed, never correcting him. One afternoon, Noah asked to go to her house after school. Ruth hesitated. It had been years since small feet ran through those hallways, but something inside her whispered that it would be all right. Noah was enchanted by every corner. "It smells like rest in here," he said, walking into the living room. He browsed through the books, picked one with a colorful cover, and sat on the rug. Ruth made hot chocolate and cut the little cakes into small slices. They ate in silence, listening to the birds outside the window. Later, Ruth drove him back to school. In the car, Noah dozed off for a few minutes with his head resting against the window. She parked, but didn't have the heart to wake him right away. She watched his calm face, his long eyelashes, and felt a tenderness she hadn't known in years. She knew she was getting attached, and part of her wondered if that was fair, to the boy, to herself, to the daughter who was no longer there. But maybe that's exactly what made it all so special. Love, when it arrives unannounced, doesn't come to replace anything. It comes to fill the spaces we thought had been forgotten. And in that moment, Ruth understood. What they were building didn't need the right names. It only needed to keep happening. That night, after dropping Noah off at school, Ruth returned home with a full heart and a restless mind. She sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing her shoes, staring down the dark hallway. The ticking of the living room clock was the only sound filling the silence around her. But inside, a much louder noise was beginning to take shape. She was getting attached. She knew it. And more than that, she was reliving feelings she thought had been buried along with her daughter, the care, the joy, the anticipation for the next day. Everything Noah awakened in her was beautiful and dangerously familiar. The next morning, she let her toast burn in the toaster. She opened the drawer where the cloth napkins were kept, and by chance found an old handwritten note from her daughter. "Be right back. Don't forget to smile today." Her stomach churned. She sat down holding the note as if reading it for the first time. It was just a yellowed piece of paper, but in it was her daughter's voice, and along with it, the fear. What if she lost Noah too? What if she built expectations, and everything vanished again? The following week, Ruth visited the hospital for the first time. She wanted to learn more about the boy's father, to understand if this bond she was building had a future, or if it was just a temporary crossing. She was greeted by a social worker who led her to the waiting room. "He's conscious but still recovering. There's no estimated discharge date." Ruth nodded and sat down, her hands clasped in her lap. From a distance, she could see him lying down, eyes open, face weary. He had the same look Noah had when he slept, soft features, calm breathing. The social worker returned. "He knows who you are. Noah talks a lot about Grandma Ruth." Ruth smiled faintly, but soon lowered her eyes. That night back home, she prepared dinner but had no appetite. The image of Noah's father, so fragile and far away, brought back memories of her daughter's final days. The silent fight against pain, the helplessness, the unplanned goodbye. Then she made a decision. She would step back for a while. Noah was too sweet, and she had already lost the most precious part of her life once. She couldn't bear to lose again. The next day, she didn't stop by the school, nor the following week. No snacks, no drawings, no messages, just silence. Her mornings returned to being quiet, her afternoons long, and the house, recently filled with laughter and cake crumbs on the rug, once again became a reflection of absence. But the silence now was more unsettling. One afternoon, when she opened the mailbox, she found an envelope with a folded sheet inside. It was a drawing, Noah and Ruth sitting on a bench, and a sentence in the corner. "Did she leave like Mommy did?" Ruth felt her legs go weak. She entered the house without even closing the door, sat down in the same armchair as always, but her heart was pounding. She was doing exactly what she once swore she'd never do again, abandoning love out of fear of pain. After all, as her daughter used to say, fear can be a form of cowardice too. That night, Ruth decided she needed to fix what could still be fixed. That Friday afternoon, Ruth spent more time in front of the mirror than usual, not to fix her hair or choose the best outfit, but to truly face herself. She had pulled away, run maybe, trying to shield her heart from reliving the same emptiness that her daughter's loss had left years ago. But when she saw Noah's drawing with that innocent question, "Did she leave like Mommy did?" something inside her broke. She knew she had to go back. On Saturday, she baked a carrot cake with chocolate frosting, the same one she used to make for her daughter's birthdays. She placed it in a red-lidded container, grabbed a blank notebook, and headed to the school, where she knew Noah liked to play in the courtyard on weekends. When she arrived, she saw him sitting on one of the concrete benches, staring at the ground. His shoulders were hunched, his hands were covered in chalk. He looked like the portrait of silent waiting. She approached slowly, said nothing, just sat beside him. Noah looked at her without any reaction. "I brought cake," Ruth said, almost in a whisper. He didn't reply, but he didn't move away either. "I left. Because I was scared, Noah. Scared of feeling again what once hurt too much. But even trying to run away, I realized the longing you left behind was greater than any fear." He stayed silent, then, slowly, rested his head on her arm. Ruth held back the tears. She just ran her hand through his hair and stayed there, still breathing with him, as if they were trying to sync their hearts. "Mommy in heaven still thinks you were a gift," he said, his voice muffled. This time she didn't hold back the tears. "And you're the piece that was missing from the home my daughter left behind." The following week, Ruth became part of Noah's routine again. She started picking him up from school on some days, brought books for them to read together, and they created a habit of writing down good things that happened during the week in the blank notebook. "It's for us to remember," Ruth told him, "all the things that are worth it." Noah began drawing his happy memories there. The first drawing was simple: a house with 2 windows, a boy and a lady holding hands in the garden. On the last page, Ruth wrote a sentence: "Sometimes all we need is a new beginning that smells like cake and feels like the silence of a hug." Shortly after, the social worker called her in to talk. "Noah's father is recovering well. He'll still need time, but he asked to speak with you personally." Ruth went to the hospital, her heart tight. The man welcomed her with teary eyes. "I've heard what you've done for my son. He talks about you with such affection. It moves me deeply. And, if you'd like, I'd love for you to stay in his life, as part of it, as a grandmother, if that's what you want to be." Ruth nodded, her eyes misty. "I already feel that way." The father smiled. "Then that's it. You've got 2 boys now, 1 little one, and 1 grown-up, still learning how to be better." They hugged with gratitude. That day when she got home, Ruth sat at the table, looked at the memory notebook, and wrote one more line. "Family isn't who stays from the beginning. It's who chooses to stay, even after the fear." The weeks following Ruth's reunion with Noah felt different, lighter, more complete. She began organizing her weekends as if she were once again expecting cherished guests. Now, with the smell of popcorn on the stove, gentle laughter filling the living room, and colored pencils scattered across the dining table. Noah would arrive on Saturday mornings with his backpack on and a new drawing in hand. Each one came with a message: "Will there be cake today? Can we watch a movie? Or can we play hide-and-seek in the yard?" Ruth always responded with a smile, and with a heart warmed by the chance to care for someone again, with tenderness and purpose. On Monday, after dropping Noah off at school, Ruth paused in front of the gate and took a deep breath. Something inside her said it was time to talk again with the boy's father. She knew he was still recovering, but she didn't want to continue building this bond without first asking for permission. She went to the hospital alone. Greeted by the social worker, she asked her to let Noah's father know she wished to see him, if he felt up to it. Minutes later, she entered the room with a soft smile. The man welcomed her with surprise and kindness. "Ruth, it's so good to see you again." She nodded, slightly emotional. "I came because I want to ask you something, with great respect." He adjusted himself in bed, listening attentively. "These past weekends with Noah have been special, for him, of course, but also for me. And I wanted to know if you think it makes sense, if he could keep coming, on Saturdays, on Sundays, to spend time with me." She paused. "I don't want to take anyone's place. I just want to keep this space open for him, a place where he can continue being a child, drawing, playing, and being loved without hurry." The father took a few seconds before answering. When he did, his voice was thick with emotion. "You have no idea how much this moves me. Of course he can. He'll love that. And it gives me peace too, knowing that on the days I'm still recovering, he has a safe and beautiful place to go back to." They exchanged a look full of silent gratitude. "Thank you," Ruth said, her eyes misty. "No, thank you," he replied, "for being exactly who he needed." As she left the hospital, Ruth walked slowly. She could feel something inside her shifting into place, a sense of belonging, a quiet renewal. It wasn't like before, it wasn't like being a mother. It was something different, a kind of love built through listening, through presence, and through the simple act of being. The following Saturday, Noah arrived with a small letter folded in his pocket. "For you to read tonight." She tucked it away. During the day, they made pancakes, planted a little mint sprout in the yard, and watched a cartoon together. At dusk, Ruth read the note. "Dear Grandma Ruth, now my home has 2 places to love, one with my dad and one with you, and I am whole in both." She folded the paper slowly, and for the first time in many years, she felt that her heart, once so wounded, now beat in peace. Saturdays now smelled like pancakes and echoed with the sound of small footsteps down the hallway. Ruth already knew by heart the exact time when Noah would knock softly at the gate, always followed by a cheerful, "I'm here." Noah had become a part of the weekends as if he'd always been there. Ruth's house adjusted to this new chapter, not through major renovations, but through quiet, gentle revolutions. The guest room got a yellow, moon-shaped nightlight. The bookshelf in the living room now held children's books next to old novels. A wooden step stool was added to the bathroom so Noah could reach the sink. And in the backyard, once home to only silent flower pots, there was now a bucket of sandbox toys and a small hammock tied between 2 columns. "This is a real grandma's house now," Noah said with a laugh when he saw Ruth had bought a brand new box of colored pencils, just for him. Ruth smiled more and more with her eyes. "This is your home too, and everything that's yours makes this house feel more alive." They created their own traditions. Sunday mornings were for tea with butter cookies and reading on the living room rug. Saturday nights meant movie night, always with blankets on the couch and a bowl of popcorn that could never quite keep up with the excitement. During the week, Ruth would write little notes on scraps of paper and have them sent in Noah's backpack, delivered by the social worker or teacher. "Don't forget you are light." "I'll have cake waiting on Saturday," Noah replied with drawings. One showed Ruth's house with big windows and a heart on the roof. Another had a smiling lady standing beside a boy carrying a backpack nearly as big as himself. One Sunday afternoon, while Ruth was making an improvised beef stroganoff, Noah came up with an unexpected question. "When I grow up, can I still come here?" She paused for a second, the smell of the stew in the air, the kettle whistling in the background, and that question, which made everything feel even more real. "Yes, you can. Whenever you want. This house will be here, and so will I." Noah smiled, grabbed a sheet of paper, and wrote in shaky handwriting, "My favorite Saturday home." That night, as she tucked him into the mattress she'd made up with colorful sheets, Ruth realized something. It was no longer about helping. It was no longer about filling a void. It was about belonging, about love, patiently built. On the mirror in the living room, Ruth wrote with red lipstick, just like her daughter used to do as a teenager. "Family is also the ones who choose us with their heart." Time passed gently. Weekends had become an essential part of Ruth's life, and of Noah's too. Their shared routine was now part of both their stories. Ruth's house, once quiet and predictable, was now filled with little signs of childhood. Photos on the walls, toys in the corners, drawings taped to the fridge, and a memory notebook filled with lines like, "Today she taught me how to make tea." Grandma Ruth can tell stories even with her eyes closed. Even on days when Noah wasn't there, Ruth felt his presence in every corner of the house. She also felt her daughter closer, as if the love that remained from her had found a new way to keep existing. One spring morning, Ruth woke up to the sound of the gate opening slowly. When she stepped onto the porch, she found Noah holding a box, his father beside him, smiling. "Surprise?" said the boy, his eyes shining. "What is this?" she asked, laughing, still in shock. "It's your birthday, Grandma Ruth, and I made you a present." Ruth brought her hand to her mouth. She couldn't remember the last time anyone had remembered the date, let alone with such tenderness. Noah carefully opened the box. Inside was a neatly drawn picture, the two of them sitting in the garden surrounded by flowers and colorful hearts. At the top of the page, in large letters, it read, "Thank you for being my home when I didn't know where to stay." She held the drawing with trembling hands. "Oh my, Noah, this is so beautiful." The boy's father stepped closer. "He wanted to come in person, said he had to give you something he wrote from the heart." Ruth knelt down, hugged Noah tightly, and whispered, "You're the gift life gave me when I no longer expected one." After the breakfast they made together, with cake, juice, and pancakes decorated with happy faces, Ruth and Noah sat in the backyard, under the tree she had planted years earlier with her daughter. "This tree grew slowly, but now it gives good shade," Ruth said. "Just like us," Noah replied. "Took time, but now we can play underneath it." She smiled, feeling that somehow everything had fallen into place. The old pain hadn't disappeared, but now it lived alongside a new love, built through simple and sincere gestures. That afternoon, as she came back inside, Ruth looked into the mirror and saw her reflection next to Noah's, both laughing, flour dusted across their noses, and then she wrote one more line in the memory notebook. "Getting a second chance doesn't erase the past, but it makes it all worthwhile." If this story touched your heart, like the video and share it with someone who believes that love can begin again, even on the quietest of days. Have you ever received a gesture of kindness that changed your life? Or found a new kind of family, even without a blood connection? Tell us in the comments. We'll see you in the next video.